The porch groaned beneath the weight of the wind, every gust dragging a fresh sheet of snow across the hard-packed earth. Inside the cabin, the fire was low but steady, casting long orange fingers across rough-hewn floors. A man sat in silence, hunched at a table scarred with knife marks and oil stains, his hands wrapped around a rusted tin mug. Steam rose, curling like ghosts from the black coffee within. Then came a knock. Not loud, not desperate, just a single, hollow rap that split the silence like a crack through ice. Silas Granger didn't move for a moment, just blinked, set the mug down slow. He hadn't heard a voice in 5 days, not since the storekeep in Ashfall grunted at him and rang up salt pork and whiskey. He stood, the chair legs scraping the floor. His limp was slight today. The cold sometimes numbed it better than laudanum. A gust slammed the window pane as he pulled the door open. They stood there like ghosts. The woman first, tall despite the way she leaned sideways, one hand clutched low at her ribs where blood had long since dried to a black crust. Her coat was threadbare, too big, sleeves rolled. Her face bore bruises, a dark bloom beneath one cheekbone, and her mouth trembled but never opened. Behind her, for children, a ladder of ages, barefoot in rags. The eldest boy, maybe 11, held his mother steady with one arm. The youngest, a toddler, stared up at Silas with hollow eyes, thumb in his mouth, cheeks sunburnt raw from wind. None of them cried, not even a whimper. Silas looked at them, then past them, to the white blind world that had spat them onto his doorstep. He stepped aside. No word passed his lips. The children moved first. One by one, they shuffled inside, keeping close, clutching each other like they feared to vanish if they let go. The woman took a shaky step, then another, and crumpled. Silas caught her before she hit the floor. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breath short and fast. He felt the heat of her wound against his shirt, wet again. He grunted and lifted her carefully, the effort sharp against his bad leg. The girl, maybe 9, followed him with her eyes but didn't move. He laid the woman on the cot by the hearth, swept the table clear with one arm, and began tearing a yellowed sheet from the shelf in the corner. The knife he used was clean. The water he poured into the kettle was not, but it would boil soon enough. The pot of beans he kept for supper went on the fire too, beside the kettle. The kids watched, standing in a huddle near the door, like stray dogs unsure if they just stepped into kindness or into something worse. Silas didn't look at them, just knelt beside the woman and peeled back her coat. The hole in her side wasn't deep. A grazing shot, maybe, or a splinter from something sharper. Dried blood around the tear, angry red beneath. Infection, if it hadn't already begun, was near. He cleaned the wound in silence. She moaned once, but didn't wake. When he finished, he wrapped her ribs in a bandage torn from an old pillowcase, tied snug and clean. He straightened slowly, back popping, leg aching. His eyes settled on the children. The boy flinched under his gaze, then stepped forward, just a half step. Silas nodded toward the fireplace. Sit. It was gravel and wind, that word. The first he'd spoken. The boy obeyed. The others followed. He ladled beans into mismatched tin bowls, slid them toward the hearth, and watched as little hands reached for food with the kind of caution that only came from long hunger. They didn't thank him. He didn't expect them to. When they finished, they sat curled on the bearskin rug, backs against the wall. The youngest fell asleep curled beside the girl, her tiny hands resting on his chest like a kitten guarding a sibling. Outside, the storm thickened. Inside, it was still. The kind of still that had weight to it. Silas settled into his chair again, the one nearest the fire. He didn't touch his coffee, just watched the flame flicker across the woman's pale face. Her lips twitched in sleep, as if chewing on some terrible memory. He recognized the look. He'd worn it himself for years after the war. Later that night, as the wind howled and the shutters rattled, Silas lay awake. The kids breathed soft from their makeshift beds, blankets and flour sacks and coats on the floor. The woman hadn't stirred. He'd placed a tin of boiled cloth beside the bed in case she bled again. He sat in his bed, boots still on, watched the shadows shift on the ceiling. Something had torn through them before they reached his door. He didn't know what, but he could guess. Men like those that once roamed camp towns after payday. Men who owned things that couldn't scream. He touched the revolver on the shelf beside his bed. Old but clean. Loaded. The fire popped. Morning came slow. The sun barely cracked the clouds, and the frost painted the windows in patterns like spiderwebs. Silas rose before the children, poured water, ground the last of his coffee, fried cornmeal and bacon fat, until the smell brought small feet padding to the hearth. The woman stirred. She blinked at the rafters, then tried to sit up, too fast. She winced, and Silas was there, holding her shoulder. "You're all right," he muttered. "Lay still." She looked at him, not with fear, but with a strange sort of caution, like she wasn't sure what kindness might cost. My name's Clara," she whispered, her voice cracked dry. Silas didn't answer. She looked around at the children, counted them with her eyes. Relief, ragged and real, crossed her face. "Thank you," she breathed. Still, he said nothing. He walked to the stove and ladled out cornmeal cakes onto a wooden plate, set it beside her on the cot, without a word. She tried to speak again. He held up a hand, turned back to the fire, and poured himself coffee. The silence returned, not cold, but heavy. A silence that carried weight, that knew loss. Outside, the wind had calmed, but it would be back. It always came back. And now, so had something else. Something fragile. Something near broken. But not gone. Not yet. The snow came heavy on the second night, burying the fence posts and silencing the world in a thick, white hush. The wind howled less now, tired, perhaps. But the cold deepened, seeped into the bones of the ranch like old grief. Inside, the cabin creaked under the weight of it. The fire never died, not while Silas kept watch. Clara woke slowly on the third morning. Her eyes fluttered open to the sound of logs snapping and children whispering. The pain in her side had dulled to a throb, and when she tried to sit up, her breath caught sharp. Still, she swung her legs down, feet landing quiet on the splintered floorboards. She stood, took one step toward the door. Silas, sitting at the table with a whetstone and a dull knife, didn't move, didn't raise his voice. Just looked at her. That look stopped her cold. She stayed. By the fire, the girl, Elsie, clutched her torn doll to her chest, its stitched face worn blank. That night, after the others had drifted into sleep and Clara lay again on the cot, she stirred at a sound and opened her eyes. Silas was near the hearth, crouched in silence, needle and thread in hand. The doll lay in his palm, torn seam opened along its leg. He worked slow, careful, using a strip of fabric from an old saddlebag he hadn't touched in years. He didn't notice her watching. In the morning, the doll sat upright by the fireplace, a new red ribbon tied crookedly around its neck. Claire didn't speak of it, but she noticed the way Elsie cradled it closer that day, how she smiled, only a little, while the snow drifted against the glass. Outside, Silas taught the eldest boy, Micah, to split logs. The boy's hands were raw, and used to the weight of the axe. He swung clumsy, missed more than he hit. Silas didn't correct him, just handed him another log each time and waited. Micah grunted, jaw clenched in quiet determination. Silas nodded once when the axe finally split through with a satisfying crack. No praise, no words, just a shared glance. The littlest one, Samuel, took to following Silas like a shadow. In the barn, he dragged an empty feed sack behind him, the burlap too big for his tiny frame. He tripped often but always stood again. Silas didn't stop him. When the boy collapsed in the hay, laughing at nothing at all, Silas allowed a small twitch of the mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. At night, when the fire burned low and the wind returned, Clara lay beneath patched quilts, tracing the scar on her wrist. A faded brand, half-melted, like a cattle mark gone wrong. She touched it without flinching now. Once, it had marked her as property, someone's possession. Now it was just skin. She hadn't sung in years. Her voice had gone dry the day her husband traded her for a team of oxen and a pair of boots. She still remembered the church hymns, though. Remembered the way her father's voice used to shake the rafters. Now her voice was silence. She kept to herself mostly. Spoke little, moved carefully. Each time she looked toward Silas, There was something unreadable behind her eyes. Not fear. Not yet trust. Something in between, like a traveler unsure if the bridge beneath her feet would hold. Each morning, Silas would rise before dawn and disappear for a short while. Clara noticed it by the third day. The creak of floorboards, the gentle click of a door down the hall. The children never followed. Even Samuel stayed curled in his pile of blankets. One day, curiosity tugged. Clara waited a few moments, then pushed herself upright and stepped into the hallway. At the end, a closed door. No sound beyond it, but she knew someone was there. Sitting. He always came out 5 minutes later, expression unchanged. The door remained locked. The third night brought tracks. Hoof prints in the frost near the edge of the woods. A single rider. No wagon, no trail. Just a circle, then gone. Silas found them at dawn. He didn't speak of it. Just stood for a long time with the wind tugging at his coat, staring into the pines. When he returned to the cabin, he moved a little slower, tightened the windows, checked the hinges, pulled a revolver from beneath a loose floorboard, and set it on the mantel. Open, deliberate. That evening, Clara stirred the beans, while Silas set the table. The children sat close to the fire, trading bits of roasted apple and whispering stories in the hush of the room. She turned to him. "You don't even know us," she said, voice low. He didn't answer. She placed a plate down in front of him. "Why?" He looked up, eyes the color of overcast sky, rimmed with ash and dust. "Didn't say I had a reason," he said. The room settled again. A long moment passed between them, full of things unspoken. She nodded once and sat across from him. Later that night, long after the children had gone to sleep and the fire had dimmed, Clara stood at the window, watching snow drift over the field. She held a cup of cold tea in her hands, but she wasn't drinking it. Silas sat in the corner, oiling the revolver. Not out of fear, but habit. "They'll come back," she said softly. He didn't look up. "The man, the one who owned me. He won't let go easy." He nodded. "You don't have to." "I do," he said. She turned to him. "Why?" He looked at her for a long time, the kind of look that stripped away years. "You look like someone I failed to save." She opened her mouth, then closed it. In the quiet that followed, she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Outside, the night watched, but the wind didn't howl. It only whispered, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them was entirely alone. The snow had quieted the land again, laying a white hush over the hills and barns and trees that bent like old men in prayer. Smoke curled slow from the chimney, dark against the pale sky. Inside the cabin, the children played in whispers. Clara washed dishes in a tin basin, sleeves rolled high, the water steaming as her breath. Silas stood on the porch, one hand resting on the post, the other curled around a cup gone cold. He saw them before they saw him. 2 riders on black horses, faces wrapped in scarves, coats stiff with trail grime. They came slow, not cautious, confident. Men who knew the sound of screams and the price of silence. Their saddles jingled with spurs and brass. One of them leaned forward, pushed back his scarf, grinned like a knife. "Well, hell," he said, voice loud enough to carry. "Ain't this the end of a lovely little trail?" The other chuckled, slapping snow from his gloves. "She's got grit, I'll give her that. Dragging them little mutts all this way." Clara stepped out onto the porch. She didn't say anything, just stood behind Silas, hand resting on the doorframe like it might give her something solid to hold onto. The first rider tipped his hat. "Evenin', Miss Rose. Or should I say number 16? Her jaw clenched. "We came polite," the second man said. "Ain't looking for a fuss. Just come to collect what's owed." "They're not yours," she said, voice low. "They are. Papers say so." There were no papers. The first rider chuckled, looking at Silas. "You the new man. Don't look like much." Silas didn't speak, just watched. The wind tugged at his coat. His eyes flicked once to the barn, where the children had hidden themselves behind a stack of hay, peering through slats. "Look," the second man said. "We don't got to do this mean. Just hand her over. And the brats. We'll be on our way." Silas stepped forward, just one pace. A single boot print in the snow. The men tensed, hands hovering near their belts, but they didn't draw. Not yet. After a long beat, the first man leaned back in his saddle and spat. "We'll be back." They turned, horses crunching over the snow like bones underfoot. The wind picked up again. Silas watched until they were gone, then walked inside. Clara hadn't moved. Her hands trembled, barely. He looked at her. She shook her head, not in fear, but something else, shame maybe, regret. He said nothing. The next morning, Silas saddled his horse and rode into Ashfall. The town was quieter than usual. The snow hadn't been cleared. Boots tracked mud through the saloon doors. The sheriff sat slumped outside his office, flask in hand, badge tarnished, eyes red. Men came riding in, Silas said. The sheriff nodded like he already knew. Didn't cause trouble. Not in town. Silas stared. The sheriff didn't meet his eyes. He moved on. The storekeeper ducked inside when he saw him coming, shuttered the door. The preacher, standing in front of the old chapel, squinted at him. "She's with you?" the man asked. Silas said nothing. "She was owned, boy. Bound. Ain't no redemption in that." Silas turned the horse without a word and left the town behind him. The ride home was longer somehow. Sky had gone gray again. Storm rolling in. He boarded the windows that afternoon. Hammered each nail slow and hard. Clara watched from inside, arms folded across her chest. She didn't ask questions. Just boiled beans for supper and told the children to stay close. That evening, he stared at the revolver on the shelf, took it down, cleaned it, loaded each chamber one by one. By nightfall, the world had disappeared into snow. Visibility dropped to a whisper. The barn groaned beneath the wind. Clara tucked the children into the far corner of the cabin, beneath quilts, near the fireplace. They didn't ask why. Silas stepped out without a coat. He crossed the yard slow, breath thick in the cold, and entered the barn. It smelled of hay and horses and old oil. He sat in the dark, waiting, listening. Sometime past midnight, the door creaked. A figure stepped inside. Moved careful, slow, boots crunching faint over frozen straw. Silas didn't speak, didn't move. The figure turned. Their eyes met. One breath. Then the shot. It cracked the night like lightning, echoed into the hills. The man collapsed, jaw slack, blood painting the hay red beneath him. Silas stood for a long while, watching the body. Then he dragged it out beneath the falling snow and buried it behind the barn. No words, no markers. When he came back in, Clara was sitting at the table, her face pale but calm. The children were upstairs. One candle burned low. She stood as he entered. "There was another," she said. He ran. She nodded, then stepped toward him. "You didn't have to." He poured water into a cup, handed it to her. "I know." He limped past her toward the hallway. She followed. At the end, he paused. Fingers hovered over the doorknob. He turned it. The door opened slow, hinges stiff with disuse. Dust hung in the air, golden in candlelight. The room was small. A child's bed sat beneath the window, a faded quilt folded neatly. Shelves lined the walls, wooden toys, old ribbons, a painted rocking horse. A name carved into the bedpost in shaky letters. Eliza. Clara stepped inside, soft as breath. She was 5, Silas said. Had her daddy's temper. Her mama's eyes. Clara looked at him, quiet. "She caught fever while I was still wearing blue. I got back, and they were both gone. House empty. Just dust and the dog, near starved." He didn't speak for a long time. Clara knelt beside the bed, pulled her daughter's doll from her coat pocket, the one Silas had mended. She placed it gently on the shelf, beside a wooden soldier. They stood there in silence. The candle flickered. Outside, the wind was dying down. The snow melted slow that spring, retreating inch by inch across the field, like a ghost giving up its grip. The land reemerged in patches, mud and stone, stubborn grass poking through like green fingers. The wind softened, the sky changed its tone, and for the first time in years, the ranch began to breathe again. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned, but it no longer felt like a defense against the world. More comfort now. Something shared. Clara stood by the stove, stirring a pot of beans and cracked corn. Her sleeves were rolled, hair tied back, and without realizing it, she began to hum. Just a low tune, soft as steam rising from the pot. The kind sung in church pews long before she was ever bought or sold. Silas sat at the table, watching without watching, whittling a length of wood into something that didn't yet know what it wanted to be. The children had taken over the porch, their laughter tumbling in through the open window like wind chimes in motion. Barefoot, wild free. Micah chased Elsie with a stick-turned sword, while Samuel squealed and clung to her skirts. The youngest, Ruth, quiet as a mouse, sat under the railing drawing circles in the dirt with a twig. A storm of sound and joy. Silas didn't say a word, but something shifted in his face. His mouth twitched upward, faint as a breath. Not wide, but real. A second plate sat at the table that night, clean and waiting before she ever sat down. A sixth chair had been dragged in from the barn and fixed with new legs. Clara didn't say anything when she noticed. Just sat, smoothed her skirt, and passed the biscuits in silence. By the end of the meal, she was smiling too. They kept close after that. Never discussed what had passed or the man buried behind the barn. The fear had lifted, but the memory stayed. In the quiet moments, Clara would touch her wrist without realizing it, and Silas would linger just a second longer in the room where Eliza's toys gathered dust. Then one afternoon, the children disappeared. It was Ruth who whispered it first. "They're in the barn." Silas and Clara followed, slow and curious, the afternoon sun stretching long shadows across the dirt. Inside, the air smelled of hay and old wood, warm and dust-rich. At the far end, near the stalls, they found them. The rocking horse had been dragged from the corner, where it had sat untouched for years. Its left leg was cracked, the paint long chipped. But now it stood upright again. Rope wrapped tight around its belly like a saddle cinch. Nails hammered and crooked. The body painted in streaks of white and brown from stolen henhouse cans. A blue ribbon tied around the carved wooden neck. Micah stood beside it, hands dusty, face proud. "It's for her," he said, pointing to the name on the bedpost. "Eliza." Silas didn't move at first. Then he stepped forward, slow as dawn, and knelt. His hands, scarred and calloused, ran gently across the wood. He touched the mane, the patchwork paint, the nails sticking out like crooked teeth. His eyes filled before he knew it. He didn't hide it. No one spoke. That night, the children begged to sleep in Eliza's room. Clara helped carry their blankets inside, piling them at the foot of the bed. The doll sat on the shelf, watching them with her stitched, mended face. The rocking horse watched too, standing like a sentinel near the window. They fell asleep in a tangle of limbs and laughter and whispered secrets. Silas stood in the doorway, hand on the frame. Clara beside him. "She would have liked them," he said. "She does," Clara answered, voice gentle. Spring stretched its arms over the valley. The creek thawed. The chickens laid again. Sap ran thick in the trees, and the ranch came alive not with cattle, but with children's laughter and Clara's humming. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer ruled them. One morning, after breakfast, Silas hammered a plank above the barn doors. The children helped him paint it. Thick brush strokes, uneven letters. It read, "Granger and Sons, and one daughter." Clara stood back, hands on her hips, watching them work. The sun caught in her hair like gold spun from the sky. Silas turned to her, wiped his hands on a rag, and without a word, took her hand. They sat together that evening on the porch, side by side. Her hand rested over his. The field stretched out before them, green in places, muddy in others, but real. The children ran across them, chasing chickens and each other, shouting nonsense and joy into the air. Behind them, the house stood warm and breathing, alive. Silas watched them, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. He'd buried the past alone, but they'd helped him dig something new from the same ground.